Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
And this week, we have a special guest, Brodie Cassell. He is our first guest for 2025, so thank you, Brodie, for coming on the show. He is a Microsoft consultant, and we're going to talk about that today. So, Brodie, if you can give our listeners a little bit of background about who you are, where you came from, and then we'll get into some of the specifics.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Hello,
Our
everyone.
pleasure.
My name is Brodie Cassell, and I work in the sovereign nation of Canada for the industry solutions delivery team called the Enterprise Architecture Group. And I am a principal security consultant, and I've been with Microsoft for just over 4 years. I mean, what do I do? I mean, it's all kinds of fun stuff at Microsoft. But leading up to maybe joining Microsoft, just super quick, I used to work in a lot of like on-prem IT roles, sysadmin roles. I was with Microsoft previously as a vendor doing exchange support, unified communications. Quit life, joined or moved to the mountains, started working at a ski hill for minimum wage, shoveled snow, parked cars, learned to snowboard, and then found work in the mountains back in IT, which was at a heli skiing company in Banff, and worked there for about 8 years. And it started off just being the guy who fixed printers. I miss printers so much. I just love fixing printers. You have no idea. And, general IT, help desk, and then eventually was in charge of the overall infrastructure of not only the main office, but the dozen or so remote lodges that existed throughout the BC mountain range with various levels of internet connectivity and resilience capabilities, we'll say. And so once I basically learned everything about virtualization, networking, storage, the entire stack and printers, my wife convinced me to move to the city and get a real job in consulting. And I worked with a partner for a few years. We bought a house, and then Microsoft snatched me up during COVID as they needed security consultants, especially in Canada. And so originally it was joining to work on mostly the Defender stack in the modern work security space. So, Defender for X, right? I was definitely big in Defender for Endpoint, Office Identity, super fun. And then in consulting, your specialization should follow the trends of what customers are asking for. So you shouldn't be stuck in your one thing and then resisting to change. You have to adapt and learn something new. And so I took on what is now the behemoth known as Purview. So a lot of information security, data security, all that fun stuff. And at the time, I didn't think it was fun. And let's just, it's sometimes not fun, like retention labels. That's not like what I get up for in the morning. But, the overall like insider risk and, actually protecting the heart of the data itself, I think is a underappreciated discipline within security. So worked a lot in that space. And then I leveraged my identity and access background work for critical infrastructure companies in the province of Alberta with my previous consulting role to extend that into the Microsoft consulting sphere. So I am Defender, security operations, information security. And then more recently, I started working with the actual infrastructure plumbers / nerds on our team for like large scale Azure landing zone deployments and managing Azure policy, enterprise policy as code. Different controls that I generally didn't have a lot of background in before because I was mostly in the modern work identity space, etc. And it's just been a wild ride, honestly. And yeah, that's my day job. And I'll finish up here. Additionally, Andy and I are part of a worldwide security team, a community at Microsoft. So we internally help, bring news, events, updates, presentations to thousands of individuals who across the different time zones at Microsoft come together and learn from one another, share, which I think is really cool. And I co-host a podcast called Microsoft Security Insights. And this is our guest on guest cooperation tour that Andy and I have come up with. And that's basically why I'm here. So that's my long-winded intro. Hope you enjoyed it.
That's awesome. Certainly can kind of trace the thread through all your different experiences as you've been here. And for listeners and viewers of our last show, one of the things I went on a little bit of a rant about is the opportunity that Andy and I get from working at Microsoft. And by the way, I'll just throw the disclaimer in here. Andy and I work for Microsoft, but we do the show on our own time and on our own dime. The show isn't really officially sponsored or affiliated by Microsoft, but of course we draw on our experiences to form the show. And with those experiences, one of the things we get the opportunity to do is to understand across a broad swath of customers where they're at in their maturity model, in their journey, if you will. And you can see areas where we recognize there's an opportunity for customers to do more, to skill up, to get stronger, to harden their environment. And we like to bring that experience to the show because generally, if we're seeing a lot of folks are struggling with it, we're able to bring those experiences and talk about them here. And so it was interesting hearing as you talk through your kind of career path, you took on Purview and you said, very fairly, it's not the sexiest thing in the world to put words in your mouth, but it's critically important. And there's still a lack of maturity at most organizations with that tool or competitive tools too, right? It's just has not bubbled up to that area of top priority that maybe it should be at a lot of organizations. And I will say things like M365 Copilot have certainly spurred more interest in it. However, I saw the hat, if you want to do it like end to end, we're talking potentially months, if not years, to get that fully deployed and built out and operationalized. And so I've been encouraging customers to think about how do you do that effort in parallel, right? How do you harden your data security strategy, but get it to an acceptable point very quickly to where you're not falling behind in your ability to leverage groundbreaking generative AI tools as well. And so I think if you just say, well, we're going to do this now, this thing we've never done and kick down the road for years, and until it's completely done, we're not touching this. Now you're just falling behind on the next thing. You're not learning from your mistakes. You're just constantly staying behind and chasing the caboose of the train instead of getting on the train.
Right.
And staying up to speed with it moving forward. And so I'd be curious for you to unpack a little bit more, just to understand, are you still doing primarily the Purview stuff? You mentioned then the Azure Landing Zone and Azure Policy and kind of building that out. And that's also an area where I see customers lacking maturity is getting really nailed down in how they manage the cloud infrastructure. And like you talked about, managing an infrastructure as code gives you a lot of process and confidence. And this is how we do it every time. And it's repeatable and it's auditable and it's trusted, and we know it's going to work the same way, as opposed to kind of wild, wild west where everyone goes and builds their own subscription and does their own thing. So where are you focused at today?
Yeah, lovely. I agree with all your comments and multiple questions there. So I'll start at the first one, which is, are you still working with Purview? And what are your thoughts on customer maturity? Not currently, I would say, working on Purview related projects, but that's just because I decided to pick up something different. I wanted to switch it up when I got back from parental leave. But you're right, with the release and with the the excitement around generative AI, different applications that you can have within your environment, including Copilot, all of a sudden, everybody realized that these are pervasive solutions that have broad reach within your infrastructure, whether that be cloud, on-prem, hybrid, whatever that looks like. And all of a sudden, there's the potential for confidential materials to be widely available to many different individuals who shouldn't have them. And maybe you relied on folder access or just basic role-based access control before.
Obscurity.
Yeah, exactly. Hiding it, giving the project name something hilarious, but it's impossible now. You need to have a labeling taxonomy. You need to have security built in to your most critical data assets, the crown jewels, digital crown jewels, we like to say. That needs to be loss prevention. That needs to be encryption where applicable. That needs to be a myriad of different tracking and prevention technologies, both on the endpoint and on the network, et cetera, and different SaaS apps. All that's extremely important, and you should have done that already. But as you said, most have not. And all of a sudden, the CEO walks in and says, I want AI because capitalism, right? You're not going to tell him, no, sir, or ma'am, security first. That's not going to fly, right? Now you're just the Department of Knowing you're getting in the way. So you're right. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to have to do both at the same time. We're going to have to not only enable the business to do whatever it is, chatbot to solving world hunger, and we're going to need to do that securely in a reasonably quick amount of time to actually build the, like you said, months or years of data and information security systems quickly and correctly. And this is why in my group, which technically we're called another acronym, the Microsoft Security Enterprise Services, customers in the S500 and in the government space reach out to us to work with them on implementing Purview, for example, in a state where it can be assured that you have control and a correct authorization over this critical data. And the same goes for these chatbots or AI systems, etc. Because you don't want to, honestly, you can really mess it up if you all of a sudden encrypt the entire company's email or data with high confidential and nobody can share. Everybody's going to be calling you and you're going to hate your life and you're going to want to leave. And no one's going to ever want to do it again. You have to get it right the first time. Extremely important topic. And I'm trying to get out and do and have more speaking opportunities in my career. And one that I applied for at the Midwest Management Summit in Minnesota in May was specifically around how do we protect our data against AI effectively, right? How do we have assurance, not only from humans, but also from now AI-based systems that they can't read the 5-year plan. They can't read everybody's budgets. They can't see everyone's personally identifiable information. It's extremely important. And I think a lot of people are waking up to the reality that they need this. And I would hope that more people in the security practitioner space embrace the challenge and the elements of fun that can be as part of this rollout. It's not just labels. Like it can be like you said, not sexy, but there's a lot of very cool security concepts and capabilities that you can put in place in the Microsoft stack. And I work at Microsoft too, so I'm just going to be a big Microsoft guy here. Insider risk management, adaptive protection, on the fly loss prevention. These are really cool controls and capabilities that you can implement. They're fun to implement too.
Well, and I want to unpack that a little bit more, the very last thing you just talked about, because I think it's a really important point. And it's something that has changed very quickly. And I think organizations and individuals just haven't caught up to this concept yet. So number one, Microsoft kind of quietly rebranded all this. We used to call this all compliance, and now we're calling it data security, which is a better name for it. And I like that because it also helps security practitioners understand you should have a play here too. But what I want to unpack is the last thing you talked about insider risk and adaptive protection. And organizations still think of these in very siloed concept. Data loss prevention is a thing, and information protection is a thing. It's like those all go together. That's all one big holistic thing. And then I start talking about, well, now we have adaptive protection where we can take signals from insider risk, and then we can apply different levels of data loss prevention policy depending on the perceived risk of the user, as just one example. And this all becomes, instead of a siloed system of, I have a DLP tool, ForcePoint, I have an information protection tool, Bolden James, I have this tool. This is an ecosystem serving a broader goal, which is protect your data based on perceived risk around it or sensitivity around it, both the sensitivity of the content, but also the risk associated with the user and their actions. And that's all one thing. If you're trying to do this through siloed tools, it's really the same story we've told in security for years all over again. Now on the data security side, you're going to have a better experience if that's an integrated platform as opposed to a bunch of tools you're trying to stitch together.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Well, you said before the show started, like you work a lot in financial services, and that's actually a huge challenge area for this because generally there's acquisitions and divestitures. And there's always a myriad of different loss prevention tools, labeling tools, detection tools, etc. And agreed. Again, I'm a stockholder / employee.
Yep, we all are.
I love the I love the stack, but I really mean that, and I'm not ignorant to what's out there, but like the top to bottom integration in that overall data security, information security stack under Purview is. It just works quite well, and the insider risk adaptive protection. I mean, it's better than okay. So all of a sudden, Andy, who's been quiet, is quietly deciding he's going to quit, and he wants to move, a bunch of data to a USB. He wants to get that out of the organization. He wants to email that. He wants to drop that into sketchy SaaSapp.com, whatever that may be. There could be automated protection mechanisms against that. It's not just it happened, and now Andy's off to the Bahamas, right? Like you can actually get in front of this now. And you don't need a manual individual sitting there like making a decision like, is Andy legitimately needing all of these files or should I block them? It needs to be automated. It's impossible to do this at scale manually. You need to have automation. You need to have tight controls. And you need to have dynamic policies similar to kind of how conditional access works with like risk scoring, with user risk scoring, device risk scoring. You need to be able on the fly prevent or allow or restrict because there's no time for one individual to be in the loop making these decisions anymore. And I would argue, I know a lot of people hate or are not cool with compliance, and I agree the name of the practice and the capability stack changing helps, I think, more represent what we're talking about here. But if you have like a true zero trust mindset, and you assume that they're already in, the bad actors, either from an insider threat capacity or an external attack vector, if they're already in, the last bastion of hope you have of preventing data from being exfilled, which is generally the point of most intrusions, is protecting the data at its source, whether that's the container that the data lives in, or actually allowing some rights management to live with that data when it is exfilled out of the environment so that it's encrypted AES-256 until quantum comes out. And you have to actually, authorize or authenticate and authorize to access it. Like, that's kind of your last bastion of safety once that data has been removed from your environment. And so I love all of the don't let them in and endpoint protection and identity and lateral movement. I love all that stuff, and it's way sexier. But like, ultimately, if all of that fails, you need to have something on the data, right? At the very least, your critical data, because that's your last attempt before it's out, and then it's public knowledge, and then ransomware and all the fun stuff that comes with that.
It's a really good point too, and I think one Andy and I articulate on the show frequently is, for the longest time, organizations have put, probably fairly so, almost all of their eggs in the basket of prevention.
Right.
Or protection, right? And if we think of it as a holistic life cycle of protect, detect, respond, or did I get that in the wrong order? Doesn't matter. You get the point of, right, we need to spread our effort across all areas, including detection and response. And that includes, like you're talking about, that zero trust, assume breach mindset. Somebody's already in, and attackers don't break in, they log in most frequently. So they're using valid user credentials, they're harvesting data. Where do we have a tool in place to detect this is really anomalous, weird behavior, and slam the door in their face? And if we're trying to do that at human scale, that's not scalable unless you have unlimited budget. And if so, I'll come work for you. So, send me a note in the comments. But otherwise, you have to do this at machine scale and machine speed. And that means building in these types of detections, behavioral baselines, anomaly detection, and being able to take actions in near real time is the only way we're going to really wrap our arms around this. So great discussion there.
Yeah, agreed.
I was over here thinking about, when you're going through your background, Brodie, how jealous I am, because I'm also a big winter sports skier, snowboarder as well. So, as part of my dream, I was always like, yeah, I could go and get rid of all the responsibilities, go to a ski resort and do exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
But what really struck me about your background was how it resonates with a lot of people who have been on the infrastructure side, on the help desk side, because I also came from the help desk side. I did a lot of printer stuff and executive support and that journey into cybersecurity. We always say that journey into cybersecurity is not always a straight path, right? And so, like, sometimes you find different ways. Traditionally, a lot of people were network folks. Now a lot of people are infrastructure folks. And then Adam and I are always talking about how having that growth mindset, we talk about growth mindset at Microsoft a lot, but shifting your view from wherever you need to be. And a lot of traditional cybersecurity folks, I think, are a lot set in their ways. And when new things come out, they're like, oh, we already have something for this. We already know what to do. But things change. And so I like how your focus has changed at Microsoft, and now it's shifted to Azure policy and infrastructure there, which a lot of people, they just deploy VMs. They don't really even look at policy to start with, and they should. Like, Azure policy is exactly like, or very similar. You can have a parity drawn to, say, GPO for on-prem. It's policy that's static, that provides configuration that you're known. So that's super interesting to me. What I wanted to ask you about, and for you to kind of dive further into, is you talked about Microsoft Industry Solution Delivery, right? That's what you do at Microsoft. And we love acronyms at Microsoft, so we label it as ISDs. And so I think, if you want to talk about that a little bit, I think ISDs really had a beginnings from the Microsoft Consulting Services, or MCS, back in the day. And how does that really work today? Like, can You said you work mostly with larger companies or governments, but explain that world to our listeners, because that is a world that some organizations might be able to take advantage of, because it's actually implementation. Adam and I work in the pre-sales organization, and so we talk a lot with customers, but you actually do hands-on implementation or consulting with customers. I'm interested to hear how that works and how customers, our listeners can really take advantage of that if they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Great breakdown. So before I joined Microsoft, you're right, the consulting entity was called Microsoft Consulting Services, MCS. And when I joined, I believe it had already changed, or it was in the process of changing, to what is now known as Industry Solutions Delivery. And yeah, it's Microsoft's consulting arm. I think every major tech company generally has one. We're definitely not like an Avanade or some of the big 3, big 4 consulting firms with an army of consultants at our disposal. And I think that's fantastic, because we can specialize and bring on and hold on to people who are passionate and knowledgeable about the Microsoft stack and work with customers who are deeply embedded in that stack. And let's be real, Microsoft's in every organization. One way or another. We're the behemoth. That's why I love being a stock owner. It's great. It's the critical infrastructure company of critical infrastructure companies, is what someone described to me. And I love that, because I love, in consulting, having an impact. That's my main thing, right? And I will always put up my hand for, especially when it works for the Canadian public sector, because we have a much smaller bucket of individuals who can have impact than larger countries like yourselves and states. I just think consulting overall is just a fantastic career option for anybody. And you brought it up there, Andy. You've got your experience, your on-prem, your printers, you spilled your toner ink, whatever it may be. You've fired up all kinds of VMs without any real concern. You've played around with your storage, your networking, whatever it may be. And you can now learn how to do it effectively and properly, and in alignment with the recommendations of the vendor. And that's effectively what we're doing now, right? So it's funny, as an on-prem sysadmin, the consultant comes in. I remember one came in to help me teach me how to build a VMware stack, and I was like, I could do this. I could just read it and do it myself. I don't like the consultant being here. But now on the other side of the picture, I'm loving being able to come in and actually enable these folks on-prem who are busy, stretched, generally have multiple different priorities going. And I think it's a great asset when a company can bring in consultants to help augment and assist for a period of time and get things rolling the way it should be. And the best part about consulting is you get to leave at the end, which is kind of neat, right? Because I don't know if I could ever go back into an organization where you're the on-prem person, because you're kind of in that silo now, right? And you don't get that broad experience across different organizations in both the public and private sector. So that brings back to, what is ISD? It focuses on accelerating Microsoft's cloud commercial growth, of course, right? We all need that. We all want to expand. It sells and delivers solutions. So we drive adoption of Microsoft technology. Every customer is multi-cloud, basically, that we work with in, the S500 and in in the public sector across different countries, states, local governments, etc. So we're always never the only player, and that's okay. But we work solely on Microsoft tech, and we would work with, integrators to ensure that if third-party integration is applicable when necessary. And it's a combination of, like you said, pre-sales, identifying the deal. I do also work in the pre-sales area with our architecture team to help scope, identify, and build a statement of work that we would then staff and bring a consulting team on, different consultants, security, infrastructure, modern work, project manager, etc. And we have a team that works with the customer on a regular basis, mostly all remote now since COVID happened. And that has interesting benefits and challenges versus being on site with the customer for Monday to Friday. Let's say it's definitely a difference. There's pros and cons I can get into later if you want. And on top of that, of course, Microsoft's rates are not the cheapest rates out there intentionally. And I don't want to misrepresent saying, we're really expensive. We bring the knowledge and experience direct from the vendor and from the engineering teams that other organizations, other consulting groups can't necessarily bring. All right. We can go up the chain and actually have impact, say, or are revealed to changes, updates, et cetera, for certain aspects of the cloud that are coming down the line that other organizations can't. And so behind that comes another level of expertise that just isn't available with your third-party consulting teams. Nothing against them. I worked with them before. It's fantastic, but there's like it's kind of like the what's it called? I lost my train of thought. Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain. You don't really know what's behind the curtain necessarily. We can be behind the curtain a bit, and we can be exposed to that. And so it's that deep technical expertise, that deep expertise in the overall Microsoft stack and what the customer needs is what we bring to the table in ISD.
And
there's more. I'll let you go. I'll let you do a follow.
Yeah.
But there's a whole chain of how this works.
Well, I'm just also curious as you're talking, I've heard, and maybe you might have some experience in this, if it's a large enough customer and there's specifically something that they need, since you have a tie to the engineering team, that might be even something that you could float as a feature because it's a large enough customer base that wants it.
Right. If you have 100,000 seats, your voice needs to be heard by the engineering team. I can think of a situation where I was working on a divestiture on a large third-party consulting firm. It was extremely complex, and part of that was how are we going to effectively transfer our encrypted data from one tenant to another, ensuring that there is security along the entire way as part of this divestiture. It's extremely difficult when you manage your own keys, and there needs to be a handoff process and how we transfer the data, and is the data protected in transit. And there were some capabilities that were just not fleshed out in the Microsoft stack for that particular scenario that are obviously evolved since then. And because this was a high profile multi-thousand seat customer, we could have a direct conversation with engineering and find out, okay, is this on your roadmap? If it is, what's the prioritization? Can we work with you to, work on this in a beta or a pre-release aspect, and then work with the customer to get this achieved before it goes generally available? And it's that agile development mindset that Microsoft moved 2 years ago. It's like, this is Windows version 1 and 2 and 97, 98 and 2000 and all that jazz. There's no cloud version 1, right? There's no Azure version 100. It's just constant. And I'm sure you folks and everybody listening here knows what I'm talking about when I say you're never actually caught up. It's always, you're just trying to keep on top of things. You're flying by the seat of your pants. Changes are happening all the time. I've got 4 different ways to be identified or to be told when there's a change happening in any of the platforms that I work on with customers. But sometimes I'll still go into a customer call and they'll be like, oh, hey, did you hear there's massive update to X? And I'm like, I actually didn't hear about that. I missed that one. So tell me all about it. I'm going to quickly look that up on the side here.
That happens to us too.
Yeah. And so it's constant. It's agile development methodology. It's back and forth. It needs to be like that. Otherwise, it's not scalable, and it's not both reactive and proactive in the good ways that we need, or that organizations need today. So it's really cool. It's really cool working for Microsoft and being able to have that level of access. And then as long as there's an NDA, which there always is with customer engagements, be able to share that. It's special. It's a unique distinguisher for our team.
Well, one of the things you talked about that really resonated with me was, and you said this kind of facetiously, but I know you meant it seriously too, was then I get to leave. When you're talking about like we're doing the work and then I get to leave and I get to go do it again. And so without going into great detail on my background, one of the first major projects I got involved in early in my IT career, when I worked in corporate IT, was doing a Lotus Notes on premises to Exchange Online migration. We talked about this before the show. It was one of the first large-scale Office 365 deployments in the state of Iowa in enterprise. And that was super cool to be a part of before I even turned 30 years old. Awesome, super fun project. There's so much change happening all the time, so much learning happening every day. There's that energy and excitement of we're doing this big thing. Well, then we got it deployed. And then it's, okay, Adam, you're responsible for the care and feeding for Exchange Online. Now what am I doing? I was doing this awesome, exciting project that was super fun. Now what am I building? Distribution lists, shared mailboxes,
public folders,
pulling PSTs for e-discovery. It was care and feeding day to day. And there needs to be people that do that. And if you like to do that, that's awesome. But I actually had a hard time with that because I miss the excitement of the project and the effort and this big buildup and building something new. It was really cool. And then I got to do it again with Intune deployment a year or two later. And ironically, we used at the time MCS, now ISD where you work, for those efforts. And we did have gentlemen fly out on site to join us both times. And it was so cool to have them just sit in a cube right there, and you could pick their brain all day long. Hey, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I do this? And have that level of access was really incredible. And so, great plug. I'll say my personal experiences working with Brodie's team have been nothing short of phenomenal. And he's very upfront about it, right? Like, they're not going to be the lowest rates. And nowadays in my job at Microsoft, I work with a lot of partners, and we have great partners. And many of them, they know the tools better than us because they've deployed them.
Definitely.
They've seen them in all sorts of edges and use cases and everything else. But here's the thing. Everyone still runs into that point when it's like, I'm stuck. I don't know how to do this. This isn't working right. This isn't as expected. Partners do have like a conduit to go talk to a product group and to talk to internal teams, but it's not going to be the same as what ISD has, right? And so when, depending on your circumstances, you're building the plane as you're flying it, sometimes it's great to have that direct line of communication and be able to resolve those more quickly, because even the greatest, most experienced partner, they do hit a dead end sometimes too. And they do a very kind of standard programmatic processes through which to resolve it. And they work. I'm not denigrating them, but I'm saying if you want to accelerate that, if you're going to need more access to engineering, that's when, sometimes the juice is worth the squeeze and you go with ISD because they can guarantee that access and the ability to resolve those more quickly and more timely.
Well articulated, Adam. I concur. Yeah, absolutely. And again, yes, nothing against the care and feeding out there, folks in like security operations, folks who are managing these solutions. You're right. I loved, and I'm sure a lot of folks have done this in their career, love the project and the implementation. And then you're right. If it just turns into all care and feeding and your passion's in the project, your passion's in the implementation, your passion's in working through the problem and getting to a point where we can all celebrate, that's really exciting. And that's a very interesting element of consulting broadly that I appreciate. And I'm on team neurodiversity. I like switching things up. I don't want to be static in one place or in one thing too long, because then I get complacent and bored. And so being able to constantly change up, whether it's what you're working on, like my recent transition from more purview work to more infrastructure work, or just changing, I was working for a lot of US commercial and financial sector, and now I work a lot in the defense and intelligence space in Canada's government. It's very interesting to have all that variety. And then you, as much as you want to be trained up and ready to go 100%, I think it's impossible. I think there's a lot of learning on the fly. And I do think technical readiness is a challenge in consulting because we are so busy day to day that it's hard. I don't know about you guys. It's hard for me to take a break and actually just dedicate time to training, especially in a remote area, because if I'm not working, I have a 7-month-old, I'm kind of hanging out with her these days. I'm not like sitting in a room training. So I learn a lot on the fly with my engagements that I, can inherit long term, but then I can also share across these other experiences with these other organizations. So right now I'm working with, like I said, defense and intelligence customer, but I can lean on my learnings from US and Canadian financial services, which is also a highly regulated industry in terms of hypersecure environments for highly classified or confidential materials. I can leverage experiences between these two environments in order to kind of cross-pollinate. And I think that's a massive benefit of not only being a consultant, but also taking advantage of outside consultants. So if you're the on-prem individual right now, and you've got consultants working with you or are planning to work with you, and if you have any type of animosity or fear that this is going to impact your job because you're not doing it correctly or you're not up to the task, don't look at it like that. Look at it as an amazing learning opportunity to learn how to not only do it correctly, but to build that network of experience with that individual, to learn how to look at something from the outside in view and not be siloed in kind of that internal political or knowledge space that you would have been in. So consulting, I don't think is ever going to go away. I think it's extremely important. And at Microsoft, it's evolved. And this will just finish up a thread I almost finished with Andy earlier. It's evolved to the point where Microsoft didn't necessarily have a dedicated security consulting team, in my view anyway, like in the space that I was in, until during COVID, when what was then called the security service line was created. And it was architects and consultants that specifically work on Microsoft's security stack. Before, it was I had security skills in a broader group of industry solutions delivery individuals in Canada. And because our dollar is awesome, When we build to the United States, Microsoft gets a discount on the cost. Blah 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 blah. Right now, Microsoft, their consulting group that works solely on security is called Microsoft Security Enterprise Services, and that's the team that I'm on. And we have the Americas, Canada, US, Mexico, and then all of South America, European and Africa time zone, and then the Asia Pacific time zone, and 3 different groups. And we work under a group called Enterprise Architecture Group, which basically is where I would say the high priority technical solution individual groups live, like AI, security, core infrastructure, things of that nature. So there's different elements within Microsoft's consulting arm and different acronyms that I'm dropping on you in different teams. But the specialized group of security individuals that I now work with, which I think is I'm gracious to be on this team. Honestly, I never thought I'd be here. I was like breaking into Windows my whole life just for fun, and messing with stuff and breaking into computers. And then now I'm like actually working at Microsoft on cybersecurity, where it's being, it's a high priority, big issue for society and for the company. I never thought I would be here. And the individuals that I'm working with are amazingly talented, top-notch folks from various different backgrounds. And it's just day to day, the impact that our team can have on these large customers, the S500, the public sector, the governments, is phenomenal. And maybe it's a huge dopamine hit, which is again what my brain desires, but it's different. It's different than managing Exchange Online. It's different than working on your VM stack on prem. It's different. It's just different, and it's honestly fun. It sucks sometimes, not gonna lie, but it's fun. And once you learn to deal with a lot of different people and situations politically, and you have to learn to say I don't know in 1,500 different ways, it turns into a very interesting game and heavy amounts of impact and heavy amounts of job satisfaction from the role.
There's 2 things you said there that I just want to unpack a little bit more. The first one is you kind of talked about the evolution of security within Microsoft over time, and that really follows the broader organizational kind of transition over time. When I joined Microsoft, we had 4 solution areas. We had modern work, we had Azure Data and AI, Azure Apps and Infrastructure, and business applications. We had 4. Today, that's grown by 2. There's now a security solution area. So security solution area grew out of modern work, which you kind of touched on. And then we added Azure App Innovation as well for customers who want to take on-premises apps and not just lift and shift them, but modernize them and build them on Azure, to help them do that. But then also you look at how security engineering was organized within Microsoft. And this is relevant, I think, because sometimes organizations reflect their org charts. Although the goal is to never ship the org chart, so to speak, it just naturally happens, right? So I think this is valuable information for everybody to understand that it wasn't even that many years ago. 4 or 5 years ago during COVID, security engineering was spread throughout the organization. So there would be like modern work, the modern work organization under Rajesh Jha, who runs Microsoft 365. A lot of the engineering was under him. And then some of the engineering was under Scott Guthrie, who runs Azure. And so like Sentinel would have been architected over there and Defender for Cloud and all that. Meanwhile, Defender for Endpoint would be under Rajesh. Well, several years ago now, Microsoft hired a gentleman by the name of Charlie Bell, who came over from AWS, so made the trip across Lake Washington there in the greater Puget Sound area, came to Redmond, came to Microsoft, and all security engineering was reorganized under Charlie Bell. And Charlie Bell reports directly to Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO. So today, when you think of who has a seat at the table on the senior leadership team reporting directly to Satya Nadella, it informs that, because you used to think of, well, Microsoft 365 had a seat at the table that represents Windows and Office. Azure had a seat at the table. Xbox had a seat at the table. Phil Spencer, who runs Microsoft Gaming, sat there. And now Charlie Bell, Microsoft Security, reports directly to the CEO. So it's critically important to Microsoft, and across the organization, we've seen it grow out of existing organizations to become its own thing. And you've probably even seen that in your own organization, where cybersecurity traditionally has grown out of the network team, because it used to be network-based controls were the entire security control plane, and has evolved more today and really grown out of that. And so I just think as you kind of walk through that and you talk through the evolution, that's worthwhile information for our listeners to have. And then there was the second point that I have totally blanked on because I've talked too long on the first point. So we could just continue the conversation on her. And if you have any questions you want to ask Brodie.
That never happens to me, Adam.
Yeah.
That never happens to me.
I get too excited about the first thing and articulated that well, and then just gone.
Yeah.
Well, I was curious, Brodie, because you talk about how you're working with the Canadian government, and then you also have U.S. customers. It's not very often that I've talked to security consultants, practitioners that have both public and private sector experience, especially on the daily. Like you have, like within your job, it's one thing to like have worked for the government and then move to the private sector, but like you're working across the board on multiple different customers that span both industries. What do you find that's kind of interesting or different between the two sectors that may be unique to security and something that our listeners might be able to pick up?
Yeah, great question. And even today, I currently have two major customers, and one is US private sector and one is Canadian public sector. And every day I'm on a different call with both. And so context switching is fun and important here. As I mentioned earlier, there's a limited supply of folks in not only Microsoft Industry Solutions and by extension, the Security Enterprise Services group that I work in, who live in Canada because of population differences, right? Now we're expanding on that. And then an even more limited supply of individuals broadly who can have the clearance level, like NATO secret or whatever it needs to be, to work with these organizations in the Canadian public sector space. And so you find yourself being a real essential element to their success once you start working with them and understanding the challenges that we have on the national security space in Canada and in Western democracies broadly. Modernization initiatives have come down the pipeline for NATO members, for NORAD, for North American organizations that work in critical infrastructure that are a direct result of the things that we're seeing today in international news and the attacks that we're broadly defending against every hour of every day from multiple different threat actors across the world. And it's essential that we take those modernization needs seriously and we work hard to achieve them. And they're not easy because I think, going back to your question, public sector does not move quickly, right? Public sector takes time to pivot and adjust and modify for various different reasons. And I'm not here to slag or, point fingers. That's just the case. And it's an institution that's lasted a significant amount of time and has had a significant amount of change and has to adapt to a significant amount of threats over decades and decades. And some organizations in the private sector who, hey, I just spun up this marketing org, 10 years ago, and it's pretty fluid and we're cloud only. And, it's not as we can pivot on a dime. It's like, that's a completely different type of customer to work with. And therefore they would be more, their ability to pivot and be agile and dynamic and change in a short amount of time is of course expected. But you don't get that with government. And I guess I would tie it to financial services most in the private sector, where I would draw parallels, because in both scenarios you have high, and in the critical infrastructure space, like I've worked in like power transmission and generation space. So these are heavily scrutinized, secure organizations that have to adhere to very specific compliance frameworks and are audited accordingly. And the impact of an event on these organizations has a significant potential, right? Whether it could be power, water, the trust in democracies, the trust in the voting process, whatever that may be, even having an effect on defensive systems. That's a big deal, right? And I'm not saying it's not a big deal to break into, like the largest manufacturer of carpet in the US, right? It's important, but it's just a different kind of impact, right? It's a different sort of financial, there's trust, right? There's societal trust. And I find the individuals who I work with in the public sector space, you can get more money elsewhere, right? And I think it's the same in the States too. I read Tools and Weapons before I joined Microsoft with Brad Smith and Carol Ann Brown, which does a great job of, to Adam's point, dictating and showcasing how Microsoft kind of went on this journey with the cybersecurity trends in society. Same thing with Satya. Oh, he's got it. There you go. I want to meet Brad Smith one day. The guy's like a rock star. Yeah. What a cool book. And then as well as Satya Nadella's hit refresh before I joined. And it just showed like, hey, Microsoft is now, ever since the Bill Gates memo, we're now very security first, and that's just evolving. We'll talk about that a bit more later, so I don't get off track on the question. But the key element here is that folks in the public sector can get probably a better salary outside public sector in the private sector space. And that's why a lot of folks who come from intelligence and defense and services often go to private sector as a new option for various different reasons, including being able to have that flexibility and be in demand with your skill set. So the folks that stay, and this is the point I'm trying to get at, folks that stay are there because they believe in the mission, right? They are there because they know what their efforts lead towards or what their efforts can prevent. And so the people that you work with are a different level of passion, I find, than folks you may work with in private sector, where some folks, it's just a job. And that's cool. I got a job, I got a mortgage, I have a baby and wife, we got bills. It's all a job. It's a job, okay? But the passion level for different individuals in our area, right, is different depending on how that satisfaction and the impact that you can derive from the work that you do. And so I find folks are highly intelligent, passionate about what they do. They are, especially in the Canadian sector these days, they're more open to changes and improvements because as an alliance member, we have to broadly be better as a group across NATO, Five Eyes, etc. And there is funding coming down the line to assist with this. But in-house, it's back to that thing I talked about earlier. When you're in-house for so long, that's your sphere of knowledge. That's your silo of information. Hopefully your organization is giving you experiences and training that broadens your ability to recognize change when it needs to happen and recognize different ways of doing things, but that's not always going to be the case. And so as a consultant working in Canada, being able to work for my government in the private sector salary and having the impact that I have is phenomenal. I put up my hand every time when it comes up to do work in that area. And often now that, to your point, Andy, once you start working in that area, you kind of are tapped on the shoulder often to continue to work in that area. But at the same time, I still want to work with private sector for the reasons I stated earlier, where I can cross-pollinate, right? And I can break out of public sector world. I can go work in a different group, in a completely different set of priorities, still security. And you can again, learn from those different experiences and be able to influence one or the other based on those experiences. Private sector organizations listen when you say, I work in defense and intel. Public sector institutions listen when you say, I've worked with the largest banks in the world. They listen because they understand what the benefits of working with those other organizations are. And so I think the main differences between public and private can vary depending on the sector and the responsibility of that organization. But going back to your question, it's probably the time to have major change in public sector. But again, you see that in other organizations too. Like, you're not going to make a major change at a large bank without really getting into it and having that roll out over an iterative period of time. So tons of similarities, tons of differences, but I do say that the passion of the people that I work with in PubSec is amazing. The impact and the responsibility that I feel to do a good job enhances my desire to bring the best I can each and every day. And I would highly encourage anyone who is passionate about building a better life for organizations, communities, and people now and in the future to take a look at trying to do some work for your government at one point. Maybe it's local, provincial, federal. Look for that opportunity if you can. And I think you even get a couple extra bucks in the US system if you have clearance. We don't get that in Canada. But if you get cleared in the US at Microsoft, you get compensated more because it's important to hold on to that clearance. And it's really interesting work. Thank you for listening to my long ramble on that. I'm very passionate about it.
Well, your use of the word passion reminded me of my second point that I was going to make earlier. So now I'm able to go back to it. When we talked about what you liked about doing consulting, you talked about liking, again, going back to that conversation about I get to leave and I get to go on to the next thing and I get to build again. And then you kind of talked about passion with comparing public sector versus private sector and the passion people bring to their jobs. And that was kind of my whole point. Is one of the things we talk about a lot on our show is career path. We go back to career path quite a bit because we have listeners from across the security ecosystem, not just practitioners or IT professionals, but people in sales, people in consulting, people from SIs and all sorts of different peripheral organizations around it. And one thing I've been very vocal about is a lot of the skills that Microsoft hired me for almost got me fired from enterprise IT. I was very passionate, to use your word, sometimes about articulating the need for change and pushing for change, to the point where at some of the organizations I were at, which you also mentioned, talking about organizations that don't have kind of enough turnover and enough exposure to the outside world, you get insular thinking. And so I kind of came in, this young kid from college, the outside world from college, from IBM and whatever. And I'm like, we need to do this. We need to do this. This is dumb. We should do more of this. And like, I really ruffled a lot of feathers, and I literally almost got fired. My boss had to go fight his VP and say, no, we're keeping him. I will talk to him. We'll work on the behavior. But like, my behavior of pushing for more, pushing for better, having vision and dreams of how great this could be, they didn't like that. They wanted me to, punch the clock, work 9 to 5, collect my pension, show up, keep the lights on, incremental change, slow over time. And like, that wasn't me. And so I was trying this whole time to, in my career, hammer this square peg into the round hole of fitting in corporate IT in the Midwestern United States. And instead, getting to work for a multinational large organization that maybe is a little too open to change and doing too much change all the time sometimes, but those skills are now appreciated and they're valued. And so for our listeners and viewers, if you're in a security role and it feels like sometimes that you're hitting the edges of what you can do, and like it's not always a good fit, or maybe you really resonated with our conversation earlier about loving projects and building and making new things. Maybe consulting is a good fit for you. If you like being visionary and pushing for different things and pushing for change, maybe sales is right for you. There's so much you can do and still make an impact, like Brodie's talking about, being able to have that thing that helps you sleep at night and wake up in the morning and go, man, I made a difference today. I helped secure some of Canada's government or largest organizations, or some critical infrastructure in the United States. Like that, I cover critical infrastructure. And so I'm certainly aware of the challenges they face, and being able to deliver power, which seems so basic and we take for granted that it's always going to be there. But what a responsibility they carry. And so getting to be a small part of that and to help them do that, that feels really cool. That's really, I love that part of my job too. So just saying, as we're having all these conversations around passion and comparing public-private sector and comparing consulting, like consider whatever you're doing, if it doesn't feel like the right fit, there's other things you could be doing too. And so Brodie, thanks for providing such great examples for our listeners on that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You need to like what you're doing.
Mhm.
I think so, right?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's important.
So you mentioned, as part of your background, I want to talk about this as we kind of wrap it up. You and I definitely have met through the security community at Microsoft, and you are one of the leaders for that internal community. So I'd love to hear, talk about that a little bit more, what that is and what role you play, and how that impacts the security organization at Microsoft.
And then before you answer, I want to piggyback on that just a hair. I heard you talk about Bill Gates' trustworthy computing memo in 2003. And I think maybe you wanted to talk a little bit more about the Secure Future Initiative and that effort as well. If you can tie those two things together to kind of bring us home and wrap up today's conversation, I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that too. In terms of, also, Andy's talking about building community. I think as we build community, it's part of this company-wide effort that security is above all else.
Right. Yeah. Great points. Well, joining Microsoft is a fire hose and a different experience when you're not used to a large organization of that size. And you will quickly find, I found that finding your community can be difficult when you're all working remote and there's so many different locations or knowledge sources, distribution lists, Teams channels, whatever it is. Connected communities were designed by Microsoft internally to bring people together across different disciplines, time zones, etc., around a common theme. And so, as Andy stated, I co-lead the security connected community, and it is every month getting more and more important as it relates to our ability to work internally to achieve the Secure Future Initiative results that stemmed from the Midnight Blizzard incident recently. The work that I've done with the team, and that we have an amazing team of volunteers. So thank you, Andy, and all of our volunteers out there. Is anything from monthly updates on security broadly, so events that Microsoft is working on, or major solution updates in our modern work Azure areas, or folks bringing news to the table and interesting discussions from different aspects of the business and both from different aspects of people's locations around the world. And so that's a monthly call that we do. And we also have many different volunteer teams that folks like Subject Matter Expert, Corner, and Compare and Compete, and our AI security group. And I host some presentations at times from some of our more hacker-friendly individuals internally who really want to showcase what you can do to an endpoint if you don't have the specific MDE capability enabled that you should be having enabled on all customers. And he gets into it, and you can actually see the impact that you can have, and then showcase that to folks who are not working in that space. Basically giving folks an avenue to share and a safe place to ask questions and learn is extremely important, especially when you're at a behemoth, right? And again, it's even more important now that we have these high priority responsibilities, both internally and externally, as part of the Secure Future initiative to lead with security in every conversation, which, we're practitioners here. We should have been doing all the time, right? But now, go figure, we're a reactive society. When something major happens, we need to make change, and proactivity is hard. Every day at Microsoft, more recently, I turned on an app registration and I gave it elevated permissions because I need to deploy a reporting tool. And I have answered so many different compliance checks and been pulled into so many different conversations around just controlling the access to that app registration effectively, that you can see the work that we're doing internally to ensure that we're not messing around and we're not just leaving a bunch of junk in our demo environments. We're taking security seriously internally to not only educate folks on how to manage resources and infrastructure properly, but also to ensure that if and when there's another event, we don't have a large enough attack surface for folks to take advantage of and potentially move laterally. Microsoft's taking Secure Future initiative internally extremely seriously from an engineering standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, and it's noticeable. And then, of course, being on the security team, we get to use that language when we're working with customers, that security first mindset, and being on the consulting side. And when we work with the communities in our volunteer time, we can continue to feel that the work that we do is helping Microsoft achieve the results and the goals that it needs in order to deliver on its Secure Future initiative through education, through cross-training, through building networks, through just everything. And it all ties back to just we're all helping one another in a one large community. This is an internal community, but I also have an external community that I work with. And I think it's just we need to have that connection level with one another and learn from one another that is difficult to do in a highly remote world that we live in today, especially when it's not just I go to the local office. There's nobody in my local office I work with. It's all folks that work in different orgs, right?
Mm-hmm.
My security team's scattered across all of North America. And we met up once in Redmond and we all had a great time learning and then also, finding the local bars and networking because we were able to kind of cohesively bring that community together and have that interaction. So community building, community management, being a part of a community, extremely important. I want to make sure folks recognize that and get involved where they can. If you can talk at your local B-sides, I volunteer and I'm going to start presenting at my local B-sides. That's a community, right? Your work community, your ISC squared broad community. We have a provincial community here called it's the cyber group in Alberta. I'm messing up the name, but basically it's all kinds of different organizations across the province of Alberta, and they come together and we learn from one another. So these communities broadly we need in the security space to learn, grow, and be effective in our areas. And this is a community here, right? The Blue Security Podcast is a community. Andy, I think, told me about it a while ago in our internal volunteering, but I totally forgot. And then over the holidays, I found it just recommended to me because I listen to other security podcasts and Microsoft related podcasts, right? And now I'm a part of your community regularly because I'm listening regularly and I love the content personally. So shout out to this podcast. You should always subscribe and download. And you're giving a voice to folks who want to get out there and who want to educate the world. That's something that I get to do internally in our community, and that's something we get to do on our podcast as well, which I am now cross-promoting at the end of the show. And I think it's super important. No matter what you do, be a part of a community, enable others, or find ways to get your voice out there. or just be a part of the conversation, it's essential. Please do it.
And that podcast name is the Microsoft Security Insights podcast. So
You got it.
definitely look that one up. It's like usually a bunch of folks from Microsoft. They bring in a guest every week, and it's a phenomenal show if you guys haven't listened to it. So definitely subscribe to that one as well.
It's amazing. I'm having so much fun there, folks. I know we're wrapping up. I just want to end on this. When I was learning basically how to be good at my job, moving to Microsoft, I use podcasts to learn while I walk my dog. And in my previous role, I had to get my CISSP, or they told me I should, and I did. And it was fantastic. I learned partly through listening to questions and podcasts and YouTube while I was walking my dog. And so once I joined Microsoft and I wanted to learn more about Microsoft security, I just searched Microsoft security on the podcast platform that I was using at the time. And I came across these folks, Edward and Frank, who started hosting the Microsoft Security Insights show. And eventually they invited me to come on as a co-host. And now we've been doing it for years with Rod Trent and Ray Wolfram. And we got to meet up at Ignite recently, which was amazing. And, we have a show every week. We either talk amongst ourselves, we bring news and we rag on one another, or we bring on a guest or guests to talk about whatever they feel like. And coming up in March, we've got Women in Cyber Month, which is something we do every year where we highlight women in security, not necessarily at Microsoft, but more broadly. And we run multiple shows in March on any given week to help, again, enable others, give a voice to folks who maybe have not had that opportunity, to inspire other women and empower them to make the decision to join and hopefully stay, and encourage others to be a part of the cybersecurity community, because we need everybody. That's a Vasu Jakal quote. We need everyone from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. You can be a printer repairing nerd like myself and Andy and get into it. You can come in from other areas of your education background that are also going to be extremely valuable in this space. And we just want, I don't care if your skin is purple and you have no hair, or you identify as one gender, another, or multiple. I don't care. I don't care about any of that. If you want to be a part of security, if you want to be a part of something with impact that's mission driven and can give you passion in your day to day, join us. We accept everybody, all different neurodiversity levels, all different types, all different walks of life. Please, just we want you in our group. And we try to on our podcast to make that apparent and to make sure that folks know that they're always welcome to come on, talk about anything, and just have a good time, educate others, inspire others, have fun. It's great. You too, I'm sure, can speak to the level of enjoyment you get out of doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't do it if you
Absolutely.
didn't enjoy it.
Right.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Well,
I can't add anything to that. That's a great way to take us home. Thanks, Brodie.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Brodie, for taking time out of your schedule to come onto our show and talk about your experiences, talk about your day job. Our listeners hopefully will get a lot of insight from that.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Adam. I really appreciate it. Andy, we're going to have you on as a guest host on our show coming up, so we can do that cross-pollination aspect. But I just really appreciate the opportunity. It's the first time being a part of a podcast as a guest, and you guys do a fantastic job. I'm going to nitpick and understand your audio and video post-editing procedures, and I can't wait to learn from both of you. And keep up the great work. I really appreciate what you do, and I'm sure the community does as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening as always. Our contact information, as well as Brodie's, will be in the show notes. Links to what we've talked about, including a link to Brodie's podcast, will be there as well. If you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future, please reach out to us. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.